Morgan is Vice President of News and Public Affairs at Oregon Public Broadcasting in Portland. He oversees OPB's local news operation, including the radio newsroom, opbnews.org, and local television public affairs specials. For many years, Morgan hosted the daily Oregon Considered program on OPB Radio. He was also the executive producer of OPB TV's public affairs program, 7 Days, for 9 of its 10 years on the air. In 2007, Morgan traveled to North and South Korea as a fellow with the International Reporting Project at Johns Hopkins University. Hopefully today's forum will be even more robust than what he saw in North Korea. Without much further ado, please help me welcome Morgan Holm.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to be here today. I'm Morgan Holm, and it is my privilege to moderate the Oregon Secretary of State debate today between Kate Brown and Knute Buehler. I guess I get to be like the accounting firm that tells you the rules of the awards program to start out. First of all, this debate will have several sections today. First, each debater will give a 3-minute opening statement in the order previously determined by picking names out of a hat. Kate Brown will open today's debate. Following the opening statements, debaters will respond to questions written in advance of this meeting by City Club's Friday Forum Committee and City Club staff. These questions were not shared with the debaters. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There are no questions from the floor. We'll rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members seated here at the table to my left to decide whether or not the debaters have indeed answered each question. If 2 or more of these members raise their question mark cards, and would you hold those up to see? That's what it will look like, indicating that they feel the moderator's question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the debaters to reply again. The debater will only have 30 seconds to reply the second time, and if the debater still fails to answer the question, the panel can indicate this again by holding up their cards, but the debater will not get a third opportunity to respond. And on our panel today, we have Etta Lockie, Debelyn Molyneux, and Jen Rollins. So thank you for doing that for us today, and keeping time at today's debate is Greg Wallinger. At the conclusion of the questions, the debaters will make their 2-minute closing statements, and Knute Buehler will have the final closing statement. We'd ask you please to be respectful of the debaters today. You may clap after I introduce both of them and bring them up on the stage, but then we'd ask that you hold all applause until the end of the program. And now we'll ask the debaters to come up to the stage after I've introduced both of you. Kate Brown is currently Oregon's Secretary of State, and she has spent more than 20 years serving the people of Oregon. Before running for public office, Kate practiced family and juvenile law, taught at Portland State University, and worked with the Juvenile Rights Project. Kate Brown began her career in public policy working with the Women's Rights Coalition to pass family and medical leave, making Oregon one of the first states in the nation to allow parents to stay at home with their sick children without fear of losing their jobs. And Dr. Knute Buehler is the Republican Party and Independent Party nominee for Oregon Secretary of State. He is an orthopedic surgeon in Bend, Oregon, where he and his wife Patty are raising their 2 children. He was raised in Roseburg and attended Oregon State University, where he played on the school's baseball team, graduated at the top of his class, and became OSU's first Rhodes Scholar. Dr. Buehler has built a successful medical practice that employs 170 people in Central Oregon and serves on the board of directors for St. Charles Medical Center. Now, if I could please invite the debaters to their podiums. And audience, you can applaud if you like now, but then please hold your applause until after we're finished. Well, we'll begin with opening statements, and Ms. Brown, you have the opportunity. Please offer your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I don't have to tell you that there's something special about Oregon. Sure, we're surrounded by natural beauty, but we are also infused with something more, a progressive spirit and a commitment to democracy so profound that we have come to lead the nation in its practice. From the bottle bill to ensuring coastal access, from the Citizens Initiative process to vote by mail, we have shown the rest of the country how it ought to be done. In fact, with my help, just over 20 years ago, Oregon was one of the first states in the nation to pass family medical leave. And still today, I get up every single morning determined to keep fighting for the values of decency and fairness, and for that legacy of innovation and leadership that we hold so dear here in Oregon. First, using the auditing power given to the Secretary of State, I work to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are managed in a way that's both transparent and accountable. Thus far, my team has identified $180 million in savings that can be directed towards schools, public safety, or health care. And because I was determined to do more than just produce a stack of reports that sits on a shelf, our audits division, for the very first time, goes back to state agencies to make sure that our audit recommendations are being implemented. Second, to help small businesses, we audited community colleges and workforce development programs to ensure that education and training match the skills employers need. And recently, with the input of chambers of commerce, we launched a one-stop shop so that entrepreneurs can easily find what they need to establish and run a business in Oregon without getting mired in a sea of red tape. Third, we're doing some truly exceptional, exciting things here in Oregon to strengthen democracy itself. I'm proud to say that we've had more than 240,000 Oregonians use our new online voter registration system that my team and I implemented. We also piloted the use of iPad technology to help voters with disabilities and our military and overseas voters cast their ballot, the first state in the nation to do so. And because of my work to crack down on fraud and abuse in the paid signature gathering process for ballot initiatives, Oregon now receives the highest grade in the nation from the nonpartisan Ballot Initiative Strategy Center for ensuring transparency, integrity, and fairness. So I will end where I started. Oregon has a remarkable spirit of innovation and progress that leads the nation. What I need from you today is help in defending that progressive spirit we have created here in Oregon, and to keep it moving forward. I've been so proud to serve as your Secretary of State. I would ask for your support again this year. Thank you so much.
Mr. Buehler, your opening statement.
Thank you, Morgan. My name is Dr. Knute Buehler, and I'm running to be your next Secretary of State. But before we start, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the Portland City Club for the opportunity to share my ideas here today, and also for the work that you've done over the years on some big issues facing Oregon. Your expert analysis in such reports as reducing partisanship, redistricting, changing the redistricting process, and PERS reform have been invaluable to my campaign planks, and I thank you very much for that expert work. Now, during the last 9 months, I've logged nearly 50,000 miles traveling our wonderful state, and my Ford Explorer has a few more dents and scratches than when we started. And I've talked with people in all 36 counties, from rural counties to the urban centers of Portland and Eugene, gone from my hometown of Roseburg to where I live now in Central Oregon with my wife and 2 great kids. And what I've heard all over the state is people in Oregon are concerned about the direction, concerned about our economy, concerned about our schools. And surprisingly, very few people even know who our current Secretary of State is, or for that matter, what she's done over the last 4 years to try to pull Oregon out of this downward trend. The Secretary of State is Oregon's second highest elected position. Our functioning lieutenant governor. Past Secretary of States include prominent independent leaders, many of whom are my role models. People like Phil Kiesling, my good friend who brought us vote by mail, Norma Paulus and Mark Hatfield, who worked across party lines and solved real problems. Now the office is seriously underperforming. The Oregonian has noted a lack of memorable leadership from Secretary Brown, and newspapers have called her leadership simply uninspiring. The opportunities of this great office are clearly being missed to make Oregon better. As head of the Corporation Division, the Secretary of State has opportunity to make Oregon more welcoming to business. As head of the Audit Division, the Secretary of State has the tremendous ability to have impact on cutting waste and inefficiency in our state government. And I'll dig deeper and stop the misuse and misallocation of our resources, putting it places where we need it, like our schools and infrastructure. My opponent likes to say she's identified waste, but I'll find it and fix it. And finally, as head of the Election Division, the Secretary of State has the opportunity to make our elections less partisan and more fair. Willamette Week has called Secretary Brown's handling of elections inept, slippery, and sloppy. We need to restore confidence in our election division. So, my name is Knute Buehler. I'm running to be your next Secretary of State. If you want to see a better Oregon, if you expect more out of your state government, please follow the recommendation of 12 of 14 of this state's leading newspapers, including the Oregonian, Register Guard, and Willamette Week, and vote for me for Secretary of State. Thank you very much.
We'll now move to the portion of the program where I'll ask the questions prepared by the Friday Forum Committee and City Club staff. Some of these questions will be directed to both of you. Each of you will have 60 seconds to respond. I may also direct some questions to just one debater. And that debater will have 60 seconds to respond, and their opponent will have 45 seconds to rebut. I may also ask each debater a question which the other debater will not have an opportunity to rebut. Finally, we'll move to the lightning round, where I'll pose a series of questions which candidates must answer yes, no, or waffle. You should have cards in front of you that you can hold up indicating your response, and I'll read those responses out loud. You won't be given a chance to explain your answers. We encourage our debaters to use their time not only to offer their response, but also to rebut their opponent's statements. We'll begin with questions to both Ms. Brown and Mr. Buehler. Ms. Brown, you'll answer first. The Oregon Secretary of State is responsible for elections, government audits, and business registration. Considering all of these responsibilities, what will be your top priority? Ms. Brown, your response.
For my next term, my top priority will make sure that every taxpayer dollar is spent effectively and efficiently. In my term, I've overseen the Audits Division. My commitment to Oregonians was that I would focus on performance auditing, and we've done exactly that. As a result of my work, we've delivered over $180 million in savings and efficiencies, dollars that can be spent for other priorities like education, public safety, and health care. We've also conducted over 230 audits on my term. We've also done some wonderful things that have never been done before by any other previous Secretary of State to make sure that our recommendations are being implemented. First of all, we do follow-up audits to ensure that our recommendations are implemented. Second of all, we worked with the legislature to pass legislation to bring auditees, the agencies, before the legislative committee to hold the auditees' feet to the fire. And then lastly, I meet with agency directors themselves.
Thank you, Morgan. My top priority is clearly we need to get Oregon working, our economy, our government, our political system. And fortunately, the Secretary of State has three important ways to do that. The first, we need to retask that corporation division, really make it a partner for business success. I'd create a navigator that cuts through the 11,000 pages of rules and regulations that small businesses create. They need to get back to doing what they do best, creating jobs. In the audit division, we need improved accountability. Secretary Brown likes to talk about identifying $180 million, but actually, was that collected? Many times, I don't think so, and she's changed her position several times with regards to that. And then the third priority is we need meaningful election reform. We need to bring people together. We need independent redistricting, campaign finance reform, and opening up our primaries.
The Secretary of State is next in line to replace the governor in the event of a tragedy. Of course, no one wants to see that occur, but what qualifies each of you to serve as governor should that be necessary? Mr. Buehler, your response.
Well, I think clearly, that is an important question, and I think it speaks most powerfully that 12 of the 14 major newspapers in this state all think that I should be our next Secretary of State, including the Willamette Week, Oregonian, Register Guard. But let's look at our comparisons back and forth. Let's look at our educational experience. I have a master's in politics and economics. Secretary Brown is trained as a family lawyer. And let's look at our executive experience, and we should, because this is an executive position. I've been a healthcare executive and managed 170 employees. Secretary Brown has been a long-time partisan legislator. And then let's look at our real-life experience. I've been involved in election reform for 20 years. I've started companies, built companies. That's the kind of experience we need in the corporation division. And then if you want real experience that you've all seen last 10 months, just look what we've done with this campaign, where even people from Secretary Brown's party says it's the best run political campaign they've seen in Oregon history.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I think there are two things that qualify me for this job. Number one, experience, and number two, trust. Oregonians can look at my record and what I've achieved. Knute Buehler doesn't have one moment of experience in elected office. We also hold very different values. Knute chooses special tax breaks for millionaires over our schools and uses the same rhetoric that Republicans are using across this country that pass bills to suppress voter turnout. I've earned the endorsement of Oregon groups that hold progressive values, the same values held by a majority of Oregonians. Oregonians can count on me. The Secretary of State is not an entry-level position. I have the experience to do the job and a record that Oregonians can trust.
Ms. Brown, your answer first to this question. The future of the public employees retirement system, better known as PERS, has become an issue of great concern in Oregon. A City Club report on PERS concluded that it is possible to put PERS on a more sustainable path without abandoning Oregon's commitment to its public employees. What role can the Secretary of State's office play in pursuing reform? Ms. Brown, your response.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the question. There's two things that we need to do to the PERS system. We need to ensure its long-term financial stability and also protect basic services like education and public safety. I support Treasurer Wheeler's proposal to cap the cost of living adjustment as well as eliminate the out-of-state retirement benefit for retirees. The total net effect of these two proposals is that they would save up $570 million for the biennium for the entire system. Dr. Buehler blames public employees for the budget challenges. This is very divisive rhetoric. This is Oregon, not Wisconsin. He is factually and morally wrong. I will work with our governor to make sure that the statutory changes are made to ensure the financial long-term health of the system and that we can continue to fund basic services.
Mr. Buehler.
Well, I'm glad that Secretary Brown has finally seen the light and agreed to some PERS reform. When I came out with my proposal 4 months ago, she said simply I was playing politics with people's pension, which is completely the farthest from the truth. This is about math, not politics when it comes to PERS reform. She's also against PERS reform in 1995 and 2003, and I think the proposal that both I and Treasurer Wheeler have come forth with are reasonable things that we can move the progress on this important issue. This is an issue which is key to Oregon's financial stability, and when you're the state's chief auditor, you can't put your head in the sand like Secretary Brown has done the last 4 years, and now for the first time speak out about it at the end of a political campaign. And let me be clear, this is not about making scapegoats out of public employees. This is about restructuring our public employees' pensions so it's sustainable for the state and also that they can count on it for the future.
Right, our accountability panel has 3 question marks on that one, so we'll give Mr. Buehler another 30 seconds to respond. So this would be, what role can the Secretary of State's office play in pursuing reform is the question.
As I said before, you're the state's chief auditor. It's your responsibility to notify people when the numbers don't add up, and I think it's clear that the biggest financial challenge facing the state of Oregon is the unfunded liabilities of PERS, and that's just not me saying that. Governor Kulongoski said that when he was leaving office, and even former Secretary of State Kiesling has said that with a landmark white paper. When you're a leader, lieutenant governor of the state, you need to use the soapbox and stand up and bring these issues to people's attention.
Thank you, Mr. Buehler. This question is directed primarily to you. In September, the Oregonian reported that your literature claimed you will promote legislation requiring any candidate who wants to appear in the state voters pamphlet to limit their campaign spending. However, you've refused to agree to a campaign spending limit in this race. Please explain your view and your decision.
Well, you know, I'm for real reform, not campaign gimmicks. I have been a leader in this state for campaign finance reform for nearly 20 years, working with the League of Women Voters and Osberg in 1994. We passed a ballot measure which completely changed Oregon State's finance laws for the better. My opponent, for the first time in her 20-year career in Salem, at the closing weeks of a campaign that she's at risk of losing, makes a proposal to a challenging candidate, which would have led her with a big advantage in the closing weeks of an election. That's like changing the rules just because you're starting to lose. My big brothers used to do that when we played cards. I think the contrast is clear. I'm not about those types of gimmicks. I'm about real campaign finance reform. I would support Measure 47, unlike my opponent. I'm for increased transparency of independent expenditures. And I'm also for voluntary spending limits among candidates.
Ms. Brown, this question is directed to you. Oh, wait. The Truth Squad here we've got two question marks on that, so would you take another 30 seconds to explain your view of the campaign spending limits?
If Secretary Brown was serious about campaign spending limits, I think that some point in her 20-year career she would have made that proposal. If Secretary Brown was serious about voluntary campaign spending limits, she would have done that at the beginning of the campaign. If Secretary Brown was serious about campaign spending limits, she would have done it sometime in her 4 years as Secretary of State, and just not simply in the last 3 months of an election. I don't think it was a serious proposal.
Well, we'll leave it there, despite the fact that two of our panelists still have questions about that. Ms. Brown, this question is directed to you to answer. Last March, Willamette Week wrote an article stating, "A legal opinion shows the Secretary of State mishandled the Labor Commissioner's race by changing the election date from May to November without informing the candidates or the public office. Why was this change made in this manner?" Ms. Brown, your response.
First of all, I did not change the election date to benefit any one candidate. My staff enforced the law, and the court upheld our decision. Could we have communicated better? Absolutely, no question about that, and that will change moving forward. The bottom line is I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Oregon, and that's exactly what I did in this case.
Mr. Buehler, a question for you. One of your goals is to make Oregon one of the top 10 states in the country for small business owners. What is the first thing you will do as Secretary of State to make this happen? Mr. Buehler, your response.
The first thing I do is restructure the corporation division in 3 important ways. One is a personal commitment from me to be that ambassador to business, reaching out to small business owners, hearing their concerns in Oregon, encouraging industries to come to Oregon, maybe even playing a leading role in developing export markets to places like China, where I've personally done business in the past. The second thing we need to do is help businesses navigate the 11,000 pages of rules and regulations they encounter. That's a big impediment to what they can do in the state of Oregon. And the third thing we need to do is go back and look at all the accumulation of administrative rules that we've seen in Oregon. There's a law in the books that says we should review those after 5 years and file them with the Secretary of State based on their unintended consequences and a host of other features. It's not being done, being ignored by our current Secretary of State. I would make sure that law is enforced.
Ms. Brown, this question is only for you. You plan to introduce legislation to create a new corporate status for companies that work to address social or environmental problems. What will this achieve? Ms. Brown, your response.
Great question. We'll be introducing legislation in the 2013 to provide an alternative for businesses. Right now, there's two types of corporations, profit and nonprofit. This will create a third entity. It's called Benefit Companies Legislation because it includes LLCs as well. But the purpose of this legislation is to enable businesses to be formed for additional purposes than just solely profit. For entrepreneurs and innovators who want to have their business tackle tough social issues or environmental challenges. I've worked with the business community to craft this legislation, and we're hopeful it'll be successful next session. But that's not all we want to do. I mentioned earlier that I developed the One-Stop Shop business portal. Next session, I will introduce legislation to create the Office of Small Business Assistance so that there'll be someone to go to bat for you when you're creating a business, and they can go to bat and help you with state agencies.
In this next section of the debate, I'll direct a question to one debater who will get 60 seconds to respond. The second debater will then have 45 seconds to rebut. Mr. Buehler, your answer first to this question. In 2010, Oregonians turned out to vote at a rate of 53.6% compared to a national average of 41.8%. Also, Oregon had the highest youth turnout in the country of voters under 30 at a rate of 35.7%. What will you do to continue to increase voter registration turnout for Oregonians, and in particular, young voters? Mr. Buehler, your response.
Well, I think the biggest thing we can do to encourage more people to be involved in our political system is to make sure their voice is being heard. I have great concerns that our political system in Oregon is being captured by very powerful special interest. And there's three things we can do to restructure our political system. We have a history in Oregon of meaningful election innovations like vote by mail. It's time for another version 2 of that. And here's three things we can do to make people feel like they can regain their voice in our political system. The first thing is we need to stop gerrymandering of our legislative districts. This creates a situation where we get more and more safe districts, which means they get extreme. The second thing we need to do, we need to re-enfranchise 500,000 people by allowing independents or non-affiliated voters and minor parties equal access to our primary ballot. And the third thing is we need real and meaningful campaign finance reform to get this special money interest out of Oregon politics.
Ms. Brown, your rebuttal and response.
Thank you so much. As your Secretary of State, I've worked to engage all eligible Oregonians in the voting process because I believe that your vote is your voice and every single voice matters. We specifically focused our work on communities that are underrepresented in the voting population. One of those is students. We've done mock elections. We've developed an online civics toolkit, and we conducted the first annual National Voter Registration Day drive with our high schools. We had 175 high schools participate. We've also worked to engage newly naturalized citizens in a new project called the New American Voters Project. We're working with the Obama administration to implement that project nationally. I'm so excited about the opportunities we have to continue engaging Oregonians that are eligible for voting. There's more work to be done, and I want to do it.
Ms. Brown, your answer first to this. Some voters in North and East Portland must take 2 buses or walk more than a mile to find a ballot drop box. What role should the Secretary of State have in ensuring that all voters have easy access to a ballot drop box? Ms. Brown, your response.
Great question. First of all, we have a new tool online, OregonVotes.gov, so you can track your ballot and ensure that it gets to the county elections office. Also online is our site showing official drop box sites as close as possible to your neighborhood and to your home. And then we have to continue to work to make the official drop box sites available. We can use federal Help America Vote Act dollars to have this happen, and we work with the county clerks to ensure that the official drop box sites are located throughout Oregon and located in both urban and diverse geographic areas. So specifically, I work with county clerks over the last year to ensure that we had official drop box sites on Oregon Indian reservations, and we will continue to improve access. That's the wonderful thing about vote by mail. It's extremely convenient, it's extremely accessible, and it's extremely secure.
Mr. Buehler, your rebuttal and response.
You know, I'm an absolutely big supporter of vote by mail, despite many of the claims to the counter, and I appreciate PolitiFact for calling out the inflammatory rhetoric that's been used with regards to this issue. It really shouldn't have any place in Oregon politics. I think there's things we need to review, though, in vote by mail to make it the best we can. Ballot access is one thing. We need to make it very convenient for people to drop off their ballot. Maybe have a structure in place so that they can get to someone who can take it in for them. There's other things we need to do with vote by mail. We need to do a clear review, study how we can make it the best system in the entire country so we can recommend it to other states. We need to clear up conflicting laws that are on the books with regards to how ballots are dealt with at 8 p.m. We need to look at access for independent voters to participate in the Republican and Democratic primaries.
Mr. Buehler, you'll answer this next question first. According to a new report from the Advancement Project, proof of citizenship and photo identification requirements in several states could prevent at least 10 million Latino citizens from voting. Legislators in Oregon have introduced bills requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote for the first time. Given that Latinos are the fastest growing minority population in Oregon, how do you see this issue affecting Oregonians in the future? Mr. Buehler, your response.
Yeah, I think this highly divisive voter ID issue really isn't pertinent in the state of Oregon, fortunately, because we have vote by mail. We actually can't even show an ID if you wanted to go to vote in the first place. And we have a form of that already with our signature in vote by mail. I think the most important thing as Secretary of State is you need to make sure our elections, there's 100% participation and 0% question about access in these types of issues. I'm disappointed this kind of divisive issue even has to be injected into this campaign. I think Oregon deserves better than that.
Give him another 30 seconds. So we have all three of our accountability panel members there would like to hear from you for another 30 seconds on this, how you see this particular issue affecting Oregonians.
Could you repeat the question?
So given that the Latinos are the fastest growing minority population in Oregon, how do you see this issue of voter identification affecting Oregonians?
Yeah, I think we should reach out to all populations and encourage it. I think by allowing people to feel like they have access to the ballot is so very important to engage people, not only Latino populations, but also those people who aren't registered no matter what their heritage. They need to make sure their voice is being heard. We can reach out to their communities through educational programs. We can reach out to those schools where there's high Latino populations. I think it's crucial to get every ethnic group involved in our election system.
Right. Ms. Brown, your rebuttal and response.
Thank you. Well, there's no other way to interpret Knute Buehler's statements than that he supports the war on voting. And make no doubt about it, the war on voting can come to Oregon. It doesn't come in the voting process. It comes in the voter registration process. And Knute says he would require proof of citizenship, and based on national figures, tens of thousands of Oregonians would be disenfranchised. He's questioned vote by mail. He supports new barriers to voter registration and claims there's widespread fraud. He's raising suspicions without facts, and it's the same rhetoric used by the conservative right wing who support the voter suppression efforts. The truth is there's absolutely no evidence of widespread voter fraud in Oregon. The real problem we have in our elections is engaging Oregonians who are eligible. That's my work as your Secretary of State, and that's the kind of leadership I will continue to provide.
Ms. Brown, your answer first to this question. What are your views on the 2011 redistricting process, and how can the process be improved for 2021? Ms. Brown, your response.
Great question, and I had an opportunity to review the City Club report on redistricting as well as the other City Club reports on both civics engagement and, of course, the work on cracking down on fraud and abuse in the initiative process. In terms of the redistricting process in Oregon, I have to say Oregon is different, and it worked here. And it worked because we had bipartisan committee that held hearings across the state. It was extremely transparent. They had held over 12 hearings, and Oregonians got to have their voices heard. And for the first time, there was absolutely no legal challenges. Moving forward, the improvements I would make is that I would work to make sure that the legislative committee is a bipartisan committee, which is exactly what I suggested to Gene Derfler in 2001. I think you won't be surprised that he turned me down. And I would also work to make sure that there are more committee hearings once the plan is completed so that Oregonians can have their voices heard once the plan is finalized.
Mr. Buehler, your rebuttal and response.
Well, I feel very strongly that we need to stop the gerrymandering of our legislative districts by the politicians in Salem. We need to give that power back to the people of Oregon, just like the Portland City Club has recommended in their excellent study on the topic. Right now, those districts are just drawn safer and safer. They get more extreme to the point where last election, 25% of the state legislative races were uncontested because there's no reason for a challenger even to take it on. That's not healthy for our democracy. We need to follow the lead of our neighbors to the north and south, Washington, California, and have an independent redistricting process. So we need to not have the politicians selecting the voters. The voters need to select their politicians.
We're going to move to the lightning round now. Ms. Brown and Mr. Buehler, you'll be asked the same question, and your only response will be holding up the cards in front of you that say yes, no, or waffle. You'll need to respond as soon as I'm done asking the question, and I'll be reading the responses out loud for our radio audience. For the sake of consistency, I'm going to read them in the same order each time. So I'm going to read Ms. Brown's answer first, then Mr. Buehler's answer first, and that'll be the sequence after each of the questions. And you will not have an opportunity to expand on your answer. Ready?
How long do we get to answer the question?
Immediately.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't like waffles, so.
Here's the first question. Should voters have to show a photo ID before being allowed to cast a ballot? Ms. Brown says no. Mr. Buehler says no. Should vote by mail be adopted nationwide? Ms. Brown says yes. Mr. Buehler says yes. Should Oregon open its primary elections to all parties? Ms. Brown says...
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question is, should Oregon open its primary elections to all parties?
Are you meaning open primaries or the top two?
Open
Equal
primaries.
access to the
Open
primary
primaries.
ballot.
Ms. Brown says yes, and Mr. Buehler says yes. Should paid signature gathering be allowed? Ms. Brown says...
I'm sorry, I still couldn't hear you.
Should paid signature gathering be allowed? Yes. Ms. Brown says yes. Mr. Buehler says...
Could you repeat that question?
Should paid signature gathering be allowed?
You mean by hour or by signature?
Your interpretation and answer, or waffle.
Well, no to by signature,
That's
yes
not-
by hour.
that's not the
so
answer.
How's that?
Moving on to the next question. Should an independent commission be created to perform Oregon's legislative redistricting process? Ms. Brown says no. Mr. Buehler says yes. Would you advocate a return to in-person voting at the polls? Ms. Brown says...
I'm sorry, I'm still not hearing your question.
Would you advocate a return to in-person voting at the polls?
To any person voting at the
To
polls?
in-person, I believe voting in person at a ballot.
Well,
I can't hear it either, Kate. There's an echo up here, so.
well, we allow...
The answer is just the card, so.
I'm still not hearing the question.
Would you advocate a return to in-person voting at the polls?
We allow people to vote at the polls now. You can go to your elections office and cast a ballot.
Sure.
That's why I'm confused by the question.
So no answer on from either of you to that?
I would say I feel fine with the policy Secretary Brown has right now. So.
We'll move on to the next question. We'll see if we can improve the sound a little bit. I'll try to speak a little bit over so you can hear. Do you support a secure system to allow online voting? Ms. Brown says no. Mr. Buehler says no. Should postage on ballots be free for voters? Ms. Brown says yes. Mr. Buehler says yes. Do you support voter registration efforts at ceremonies for the swearing in of new United States citizens? Ms. Brown says yes. Mr. Buehler says yes. Do you support same-day voter registration for Oregon? Ms. Brown says yes. Mr. Buehler says no. All right, now we're going to talk about agency audits. Mr. Buehler, this question is only for you. Mr. Buehler, you've criticized your opponent's record on conducting agency audits and identifying potential savings. What would you do differently? Mr. Buehler, your response.
You know, when I'm Secretary of State, the Audit Division really needs to be that public watchdog in charge of making sure that we find misuse and misallocation of resources and then get it to places that we've seen a lot of cutbacks, our schools and infrastructure. And right now, unfortunately, the Audit Division isn't upholding a lot of the statutory requirements. 30 top state agencies are supposed to do annual internal audits. There's a handful of them that don't do it. I would make sure that's done. There's local municipalities that aren't doing their annual external audits, and discrepancies are supposed to be tracked and resolved by the Secretary of State's office. Many times that's not being done either. We also need a tie back to performance auditing. It's just not about where the money has gone, but also were we getting value for the money that was spent. And then we see specific projects that I have great concerns about the bridge to nowhere between Newport and Corvallis, which is ODOT's biggest project, now blowing up just constructed highway bridges. We need to look into those specific programs also.
Ms. Brown, on the same topic, this question is only for you. Where would you focus your audits in a second term? Ms. Brown, your response.
Well, I committed when I ran for this office in 2008 that I would focus my work on performance auditing because Oregon has done a really good job with our fiscal auditing, and I felt like we lag behind in performance auditing. So what we've done is really beefed up the division and worked hard to identify savings, as I mentioned, over $180 million in savings. That's just from our performance auditing alone. We also conduct fiscal audits, and the savings for performance audits are realized over time as the recommendations are being implemented. And on my watch, we've implemented roughly 80% of our recommendations are implemented either within a year or in process of a year once we've completed the audit. So I will continue to do the work that we've done to follow up and ensure that our recommendations are being implemented, from follow-up audits to bringing the auditees in front of the legislative committees to meeting with agency directors to ensure that our recommendations are being implemented.
Ms. Brown and Mr. Buehler will each have 60 seconds to answer the following questions. Mr. Buehler, your answer first. Healthy Democracy Oregon's Citizens Initiative Review is a panel of randomly selected and demographically balanced voters brought together from across the state to fairly evaluate a ballot measure. An Oregonian editorial questioned the effectiveness of the process, quoting the group Our Oregon as saying that the Citizens Initiative Review has zero impact on shaping the opinions of voters. How do you view this effort? Mr. Buehler, your response.
Well, I think my personal donation to Healthy Democracy for the last 2 years speaks loudly. I'm very supportive of that project, especially with regards to initiatives. I think it's so important to engage grassroots citizens in our initiative process, and I think that citizens review process does that. I think also providing the citizens of Oregon an independent review of our ballot measures is so crucial. And the third benefit of it is you energize people who may not have been involved in the political system in the past. So I think those are all great things. I have great concerns where Secretary Brown has really clamped down, unfortunately, on our initiative process, which is just the opposite of what Healthy Democracy is trying to do. Now it's this tool of grassroots democracy is really handed over to special interests who can afford to go through the initiative process. I don't think that's good for Oregon. We need to return that to our political heritage where the citizens have access to the ballot for those important issues that are of concern to them.
Ms. Brown.
I think that the Healthy Democracy Project has been a useful tool to providing Oregonians with better information about the initiative process. It's a jury-style system that enables Oregonians to participate and make decisions about whether they would support one or two initiatives. I work with Healthy Democracy to make sure that their voters' pamphlet statement is at the outset of the particular measure that they've discussed, and I want to continue that work. But I think the real work around initiative reform needs to be done the work that I've done, cracking down on fraud and abuse in Oregon's initiative process. We hold chief petitioners accountable now for following the law. We prohibit paid signature gatherers who have had a conviction for fraud or ID theft. So as a result of my work, Oregon now receives the highest grade in the nation from the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. Most importantly, I led the effort to enable volunteer petitions to get on the ballot using the initiative process.
Ms. Brown, your answer first to this question. In 2006, voters approved Measure 47, which would have limited political campaign contributions and expenditures and established disclosure requirements for money spent on behalf of a candidate by citizens not affiliated with his or her campaign. The Oregon Supreme Court recently struck down this measure as unconstitutional. How will your office address the concerns voters raised with this vote? Ms. Brown, your response.
Well, first of all, I did not uphold ballot measure 47 because 2 lower courts had ruled it unconstitutional, and the Department of Justice said it was unconstitutional. And as we know, the Oregon Supreme Court just declared it was unconstitutional. It was unenforceable. That's why I did not enforce it. No one has done more than I have in terms of leading the charge on transparency in campaign finance reporting. I led the work group. I established the system to enable Oregonians to follow the money in Oregon politics, now with our Star system. As your Secretary of State, I've worked harder to ensure greater transparency, focusing on the last 43 weeks, trying to get reporting to 48 hours when Oregonians have their ballots in their hands, and also putting independent expenditures online. That will continue to be part of the system. But as your next Secretary of State, I want to work to get the big money out of Oregon politics, and will introduce legislation to bring contribution limits to Oregon. It's both a statutory and a constitutional amendment required.
Mr. Buehler.
Morgan, when Willamette Week endorsed me, one of the things they said was Secretary of State Brown has done nothing meaningful in her 4 years as Secretary of State to stem the big flow of money into Oregon politics. Her failed leadership on this issue was one of the big reasons the Independent Party of Oregon didn't endorse her like they did in 2008, because she made similar promises to them that she had cut back on big money influence in Oregon politics. And she has done nothing meaningful in the last 4 years. There's so much potential to take Oregon back from these special interests. It's captured her politics. Oregon spends second only right now to the state of New Jersey per capita on state elections. It's never good to be in the same sentence with New Jersey, money, and politics. Oregon needs to get out of there. We need real reform. We need listing and more transparency of independent expenditures. We need contribution limits, and we need someone who will fight for a constitutional amendment that will limit contributions in Oregon's campaigns.
Mr. Buehler, your answer first to this next question. The City Club report on civics education showed a significant unmet need in Portland Public Schools for basic civics education. In the next 4 years, what can be done to address this concern and prepare the next generation of Oregonians to participate as informed voters? Mr. Buehler, your response. I
think that's so key. I'm concerned about our young people and lack of civic knowledge. It's one of the reasons that I felt the need to join the Oregon League of Minority Voters, which part of their mission is reaching out to high school kids and educate them about our political system. As Secretary of State, one of the little-known functions is you're also oversee nonprofits. I would rally the nonprofits who are interested in this topic, provide some objectives and guidance, and let's get out and sponsor educational forums so students feel more engaged. Let's lead by example and also open up our political system so it's not captured anymore in Oregon by these big special interests. The things I keep on talking about over and over again. Let's lead by example. Independent redistricting, campaign finance reform, and having equal access to our primary ballot for independents and minor parties. The combination of energizing our nonprofit sector and leading by example will get more students involved.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you. As your Secretary of State, I've worked to engage students across the state in the voting process because students are one of the most underrepresented in terms of voting. We've went to a number of high schools and did our mock elections. We developed a civics toolkit to enable both teachers and community organizations to pull an off-the-shelf product and use that in teaching basic civics. And those materials are available in both English and Spanish. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we did National Voter Registration Day with Rock the Vote. We had 175 high schools participate and registered a number of students that day. So I will continue this work moving forward. I've worked very closely with both the Oregon Student Association and the Bus Project to appear on campuses around the state. We do what's called guerrilla raps in college campuses, go on to campuses, go into classrooms, and work to educate students on a one-on-one basis.
We're going to move now to the final portion of the program, the 2-minute closing statements from each debater, and we'll begin with Kate Brown.
Thank you. I really appreciate the City Club for hosting us today. I did want to respond to one thing my opponent mentioned about engaging, and he supports the top two. That would virtually eliminate minor parties during the November special election, the November election, when most people are participating. I think that would reduce voter engagement at a time when we need to encourage voter engagement. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts, and thank you so much. First of all, one, to be successful in politics, you have to be willing to sit down with people from all walks of life. I've done that, and that's why I've been so successful. Number two, voters can trust that I will continue to deliver results because I've got the record to prove it. When I ran for this job in 2008, I told you I would be your watchdog, find savings and efficiencies in state government, fight fraud in Oregon's initiative process, and personally engage Oregonians in their right to vote. 4 years later, I'm proud to say that's exactly what I've done, and more. The Secretary of State is not an entry-level position, and none of my opponents have the experience Oregonians can trust to do this job and deliver the results. This is why former Governor Barbara Roberts, our current Governor John Kitzhaber, and Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley have endorsed my reelection. As Governor Roberts recently said, Oregonians can be confident of Kate Brown's integrity. She says what she means, and she does what she says. I couldn't be more proud to have the support of our state leaders, and I couldn't be more proud to continue serving as your Secretary of State. Our state motto is, "She flies with her own wings." Let's keep it that way.
And our final closing statement, Ms. Knute Buehler.
I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, the Secretary of State is Oregon's second highest elected official, yet now for the last 4 years it's been one of the lowest performing. There's so much opportunity to do better as a state, for our schools, for our small businesses, for putting people back to work by selecting someone as Secretary of State who is a different type of leader. As the Oregonian stated, Secretary Brown had her shot at this office, and it's time for a change. I'm not a partisan politician like my opponent who sat at a desk in Salem for the last 20 years, voting the party line while raising millions in special interest money. I'm not someone that PolitiFact just today has said has been making inflammatory, ridiculous, false claims about my views. I'm someone who recognizes this isn't what Oregon needs or what Oregonians want in a Secretary of State. We need a leader who will be a nonpartisan Secretary of State, like Mark Hatfield and Phil Kiesling, focused on solving real problems and bringing people together. I have the educational experience, executive experience, and real-life experience to be this kind of leader. As your Secretary of State, I'm going to help Oregon businesses navigate regulations so they can do what they do best, create jobs. I'm going to institute serious, not gimmicky campaign finance reform and not execute the publicity stunts of my opponent. And I'm going to go out and find wasteful spending and make sure it gets fixed, not swept under the rug. We can do so much better as a state. We just need fresh, new leadership to get us there. As Willamette Week stated, I deserve a chance to bring integrity back to the Secretary of State's office. And the Medford Mail Tribune said that I'm the type of moderate candidate many in this state have longed hope would reappear. So my name is Knute Buehler. I'm running to be your next Secretary of State. If you want Oregon to be that shining star in the West, then join 12 out of 14 of the state's leading newspapers, including the Oregonian, and vote for me for Secretary of State. Thank you very much.
That wraps up our forum today.
I want to thank our Truth Squad members, Etta Lockie, Devlin Molyneux, and Jen Rollins, for their help today. Thank you to our timekeeper, Greg Wallinger. A special thank you to our moderator, Morgan Holm, and of course, our greatest appreciation to our debaters, Kate Brown and Knute Buehler. Please join us again next week to hear Kevin Mannix and Steve Novick have a discussion about the tax measures Oregonians are going to be voting on in this election season. We are adjourned. Thank you.